Hello everyone, and I wanted to make this little introduction before we get to the actual introduction for this video, since we're starting a new series here. And of course, based on the title of everything, we'll see that we're going to focus on some programming in with the Unity game engine. First thing that we're going to tackle is sort of some customizing and having the customization for a user interface, meaning that we'll be able to drag elements around, maybe resize them depending on what you want. So we might have a toolbar that we can drag around, or an inventory window that we can drag and resize. So for example, if we take a look here, sort of get an idea of where we'll end up with, if I hit my little drag button down here, it allows me to, or it opens up or shows these green elements. Those green elements are basically what I'm calling a drag handle, the areas in which if the user clicks and drags, they can move the element around the screen. So we have maybe our little toolbars here, or maybe this thing over here is a an interface or a inventory window. So these toolbars, they're stuck on the screen here. Even if you drag them by, you can't move them outside of the viewport here. We have the same sort of deal here with the interface window, but it's also confined to a certain section of the screen. So if I click and start dragging, we'll see this. So hopefully you can see it on there, the thin line there. It's showing the border in which this element can be dragged. So it can't leave that side of the screen there. It's of course resizable. So if you click area, you can resize the window. And if you can see it spamming the debug console down there, what it's doing is emitting events every time the cursor enters and leaves the resized area. So that would give you the chance to respond by changing the image for the cursor, that type of thing. This thing is also no good, or it doesn't help if you can remove stuff and resize and move it around if it ends up in the same place it was before. In other words, you don't retain the information, you don't save its position. So we'll have the ability to save the information related to our elements. So that if I start this back up, it'll end up back down there, bottom corner here. Let's drag it up to the top here and make it a really long window and save it. Of course, once we leave play mode, it jumps back to where it was, and if we go back in, it's still where it was and retains all the information, the not only position but size and shape of it. And so that's what we're going to deal with in these first set of videos. First few, we're going to focus on the dragging behavior, and of course we'll move on to being able to resize. Hello everyone, this is Christian Interactive, and in this video we are going to, of course, create our draggable behavior script. So that's our first step in the journey of being able to allow a user to customize their user interface, in this case by dragging an element around in the screen to position it wherever they like. More specifically in this video, what we're going to do is, like I said, start off with the setup. So we'll create a panel with an active color. We'll be able to set that color in the inspector if we like. We're also going to be able to respond to user input, in this case pointer up and pointer down on our panel. We'll see how to do that in the inspector through the editor, and then my preferred method to do it within the code. Alright, so let's go ahead and get started here. So I basically have a brand new scene here. So the first thing that we're going to do is to add in a UI panel. So we'll come over here and right click UI, and we'll click panel. So what we get by default, of course, is our panel. We also get added for us is a canvas, which is the sort of container for the UI elements. And we have an event system that's been added. So the first thing we're going to do, a little modification for our panel here, is I'm going to go ahead and set the anchors and the pivot position to the center of the panel. I'm going to adjust the height and width to both 150. It's actually, I mean, it's not super important. So what we just did in moving the anchors and pivots, we're going to have to deal with, you know, at a later time. All right, so we have our panel here. Just for idea, what I'm doing here, I also have basically removed the skybox from the editor and have a solid color for my camera. So just has a background color here. You can change it to be whatever you want it to be, or you know, whatnot. I don't know why my panel here decides it wants to move around, but I don't care. All right, so we're good to go. So now we'll jump into Visual Studio Code here, and so we have the typical assets folder. Inside that assets folder is the scene folder. I'm probably just going to delete that. That came with when I created the project. As a matter of fact, let's go ahead and delete that. So what I have now is, since I'm going to be using the user, we're talking about a user interface just to keep things easy for me to keep track of here. I have a user interface folder. Inside of that is a scenes folder, which is the scene that we're looking at here. I just called it Draggable Scene, since that's what we're doing here. Sorry, Unity, should have deleted it inside of View. All right, so we have our scene there, and so what we need to do is create a script to start the action, right? So we have a new file, not in the scenes folder, in the user interface. There we go. So let's create it. I called it a draggable behavior, one with the Americanized version of behavior, which I think they have the British version of behavior and the mono behavior, which got me here on the you generally don't have to type it, you know, IntelliSense and all that. So let's create a little code inside of here. So we'll namespace this thing, and like I said, I have it in a user interface folder, and we're going to create a public sealed class, which is a draggable behavior. It's going to inherit from mono behavior, British version. Perfect. Let's do our little importing here. So we have the Unity engine import. We'll save that. Go back to Unity. Let it compile a little bit. So we have our draggable behavior. I have the panel selected. So I'm just going to drag that script onto the inspector for the panel so it gets added to it for me. Back to VS Code. So now my intentions are to, you can do it a couple of different ways, I guess. You can have a flag saying, whatever element you want a user to click on to drag. You can have a flag on saying, okay, now if you click on it, it's able to be dragged. If it's not, you have a Boolean that turns it on and off. I'm going to go with the if whatever it is, the element that the user is clicking on to drag, if it's visible, you can drag the thing. If it's not, you can't drag it. So we're basically going to activate and deactivate the element, whatever it is, the game object that's used for dragging. So what I'm going to do to tell that it's able to be dragged is to add a color to it. So we'll say public color, and we'll call it active color. So of course we have it public, so it'll be available in our editor. Don't make the mistake. Make sure that these things are basically 0 to 1 floating point numbers instead of 0 to 255 ints. So 1F and 18F, and we'll add some transparency to it. So we'll have a color that we can set in the editor, and it has a default value to start with. And I keep referring to this element that the user is going to click on to drag. So in our case right now, we just have a panel, so you click on the panel and drag it. Fine, not very useful. Probably you'll create something like a toolbar or some type of window where you'd want to click this certain area to allow the dragging to happen. So I'll call that certain area a handle. So we'll create a, first I guess we'll do public transform, we'll call it handle. So that puts it in the editor. Now what I'm going to do down here is, so I typically like to have sort of walled off between things that are available to the editor and what I'm using within the script. So we'll just create a private active color getter, which will just return the active color. And then we'll also have a private transform, which is handle, which just gets our handle. So one day, too much JavaScript. So if handle equals null. So if the handle hasn't been set in the editor, we'll just assume, for at least right now, that the handle is the transform associated with the game object that our script is attached to. And so then we'll just return handle. So now we can get that. All right, let's apply our active color. So we'll use the lifecycle method awake. So when our script is first awoken, we're going to call a function, which I will call init, which we will make now private void init. And inside of there, so if we look on the game object, the reason our panel, or reason our panel has a background color to it right now is because it has an image component attached, which has a color property associated with it. So back to Visual Studio, what we'll say is that what we want is to get that image. So image equals, so we'll look at our handle and we'll say get dot handheld, handle dot get component. So we want the component, we want the image component. Probably will being helpful to me in IntelliSense. So we'll use the, what is it, UI, Unity UI. So then, now let's just be careful. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. If image not equal to null, so there is an image on there, we'll say image.color, and that equals active color. Save that, back to Unity, let it compile, let's run our scene, and we can see in the editor we get the green, and the green is being applied to our game object there. Perfect, so now it has a color. Great. So now what we want to do is to respond to user input. Let's do it the hard, inconvenient way. For the moment, we're going to make a couple of public methods on pointer down. We'll take in a base event data. We'll import that here in a second. Debug.log. I think we'll just do a string here, pointer down, and we'll do the data that's getting passed in. Perfect. Import here, and event system is the one we want. We'll just copy, pointer up. Perfect. And that worked well. And pointer up. All right, so we have two methods there, public methods. Let's save that. Back to the interface, let it compile. Perfect. So now, like I said, when we first created our panel here, it created an event system for us. So we have the event system. What we need then is to add some interaction to our panel itself. And to do that, we'll come in, add a component inside events. We want the event trigger. And so we need a new event type. We want pointer down, and we also want pointer up. So on the pointer down, we'll click the little plus there, drag our panel into this objects tab, and now inside of our draggable behavior, we have access to our on pointer down. Plus sign again for this pointer up, drag our panel over here, and draggable behavior pointer up. All right, so now if we go ahead and run our scene here, flip on over to the console, pointer down, pointer up, pointer down, pointer up. So we're getting everything in our console as we're expecting. Now, if you're like me, this whole event or the whole action of adding this event trigger, picking this, picking that, dragging the panel over there so I can get access to the the script that I want is for the birds. I do not like it. What we're going to do is remove our component. Before we do anything else, we're going to run the scene to make sure nothing's running in the console anymore. Nothing's happening. Back to Visual Studio Code. Let's do some programming here. So inside of our wake method after our init, we're going to say configure event handling method that we are going to now create. And private void configure event handling. And while I'm at it, before I forget, since we're going to do it in the code here, our public methods now become private. All right, so what we need is an event trigger like we had on the, when we saw in the editor. So we'll say, surprise, surprise, get component, event trigger. All right, you and I both know that the trigger is null. Can we guarantee it? Maybe we make this thing and let other people use it. Maybe they'll add a trigger, maybe they won't. So if it is null, we'll say trigger is equal to our game object dot add component. We want that trigger. So now it's not null. All right, so now we need a, let's see, we'll call it pointer down trigger. So a new event trigger dot entry, and we'll configure this thing with an event ID. While you give me that event ID, event trigger type dot, whoops, close but no cigar, pointer down. Now we have our pointer down trigger. What we need to do is to say when it receives this event, what do we want it to do? So pointer trigger down dot callback dot add listener, which one? On pointer down, of course. So now we have the trigger. We need to add it to our event trigger object. So we say trigger dot, what is it? Triggers dot add and pointer down trigger. Perfect. Copy and paste. Perfect. So we don't need a trigger down, we need a trigger up. So we want callbacks, callbacks. This thing should be pointer up now, and the callback that we want is on pointer up. Now we save that again. Back to Unity, does its compiling. Play. Now click, pointer down, pointer up, pointer down, pointer up. Perfect. It's better. And actually when we run the scene, we can see that, we see our event trigger that gets added to it. List shows empty, but, we have everything working here. So back to Visual Studio Code. This is sort of ridiculous to have to do it every time, and I do this a lot, adding event handling. So what we're going to do is come over here. I've already created it before, so outside of the user interface folder and still inside of assets, I have another folder called utilities, empty folder right now. So inside of that, we'll create a file which I called, what did I call it? UI utilities.cs. So just by convention, I've decided long ago that if I have something that I name ending in utilities, it generally is going to be, probably always, a static class that has usually extension methods on it. So let's namespace this thing. So it's in the utilities folder we have, and now we have a public static class UI utilities. First one that we're going to want to create is a public static, give me a little room here, event trigger, add trigger, and we want this event trigger and trigger. We're going to need a few more things here, but let's go ahead and add that in to get rid of our squiggly. We want the event system, not the analytics one. So now we also are going to need, as we specified before, the trigger type. So event trigger type, and we are going to use a Unity action, which is going to take in the base event data that we did before, and it's going to be a callback. So it's basically just an action method. But we need to Unity events, Unity action. No, I want the import. Using Unity events. So now we have the using events and event systems. So now we're ready to do it again. So we'll just say entry equals new and event trigger dot entry and configure it again. So we have the event ID. We have a trigger type being passed in to us. We do entry dot callback dot add listener. We have a callback being added. Nope. And so now we say trigger dot triggers dot add, not transform, trigger dot triggers dot add. Perfect. And now we return our trigger and everything's running beautifully. Back to our draggable behavior. Nonsense here. So we have our trigger. What we have now is a method add trigger. That would mean a event trigger type. And in this case, we'll do pointer down first, on pointer down, add trigger. So event trigger type and pointer up, on pointer up. Beautiful. Do our importing here using utilities. Save that back to Unity. Guess if we want to be good about this, we will add a line comment, save that back to Unity again. Wait for it to compile, run the scene, click in, nothing happens. Back to our Visual Studio Code, save it, do our compiling again, run the scene, and we're back in business. Pointer down, pointer up, pointer down, pointer up. Everything's working perfectly, and this is a whole lot nicer to look at than having to write that gobbledygook each time. So in this video, we have seen how to add event handling the not so good way, in my opinion, basically with using the editor. So manually hooking it up every time we want to add event handle. Of course, you'd probably, now I can't even think of the word that Unity uses for them, but a reusable component of that, and then just import that into the scene so you don't have to redo it. And it's going to bug me now that I can't think of the word for it. But I prefer the programmatic method of adding event handling. We can do not exposing these things as public methods, and it's just a lot nicer. I don't have to drag this and drag that to deal with it. So taking care of that in this video. In the next video, we will deal with how to respond, or at least start to how to respond to a user moving our object. Right now we can tell that they've clicked on the mouse pointer and then they've released it. So we need to have a way of updating our user interface in between those 2 points when somebody's actually dragging the object. And of course, the spoiler will use basically more inability to remember names, coroutine. So we use a coroutine to respond to the user dragging our panel around, but we'll see that in the next video. As usual, you can check out the code for this video in a link in the description below, and I will talk to you in the next video. Thank you for taking the time to watch our video. I know that your time is valuable. If you liked the video, please subscribe to our channel and click the thumbs up button, as well as share the video with your friends. If you have any comments, questions, or suggestions, please leave them in the comments section below. And once again, thank you, and I will talk to you in the next video.